Hi, and welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast hosted by Hema Lomax and me, Lisa Fine. We're sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insights. Today's episode is a roundtable. So Ellen Hunt is joining and essentially leading the discussion. So thank you, Ellen. With all of the talk about AI and in particular AI governance, we've been talking a lot about a different aspect of AI, which is how should ethics and compliance functions use it and what we need to consider in implementing AI processes. We have two experts joining our roundtable today to share with us thoughts and ideas. First, we have Gwen Hassan, who's the Deputy Chief Compliance Officer for Unisys, where she manages a global team of compliance professionals handling all ethics and compliance. And she also is one of the people who's becoming a quick leader in this space for all of us and all the time. So thank you so much. And Diana Kelley is also here. She is the Chief Information Security Officer for Project AI and a very active member of the Cyber and InfoSec community. She was the Cyber Security Field CTO for Microsoft, Global Executive Security Advisor at IBM Security, GM at Symantec, and a VP at the Burton Group, which is now part of Gartner or is Gartner. So, Diana, recently I've heard you speak a couple times as well. So thank you so much for being here. And with that, let you both get a chance to really introduce yourselves. Gwen, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi. Thank you, first of all, for having me. It's always great to see both you and Ellen. I am happy to be here. I too listened to Diana on a webcast a couple of weeks ago and was very impressed. So to get to speak with her is an honor for me as well. I would say it's generous of you to call me an expert in this space. I think Diana is the expert, but I am learning quickly and it's becoming a real area of focus for my company and for me. I joined Unisys a year ago as their Deputy Chief Compliance Officer. And literally one of the first things I did was work on developing ethical AI guidelines for the company. So I was in the door for less than 48 hours when they asked me to start working on that. So it's been a learning curve for me. My kind of background, I've been an attorney for, this is my 27th year of practice. I started out in manufacturing and worked for a number of different manufacturing companies and then was lured away into a private equity holding in the logistics space, which really kind of started my journey into compliance and trade. And from there, I started pulling trade compliance roles, which morphed into corporate compliance roles. And now this is my third company at which I've led a compliance function. It's been quite a career and I'm enjoying it a lot. So it's a little bit about me. I'm based in Chicago, where I live with on and off with my two kids who are both in various states of college. One is home for the summer right now, but still asleep because, it's only 8 o'clock in the morning. So obviously he's still asleep. And the other one's out in Boston in grad school. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Gwen. And with that, Diana, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and your journey to this? It's also really interesting.
So first thing, Gwen, I am a Boston native. I
Oh,
heard Boston
yay.
and I picked up because it's my hometown. I eventually in my life, I went a little bit north because I needed more. So I'm in New Hampshire now. I needed more land for my dogs and I couldn't afford them right in Boston. As you know, it's
Yeah.
expensive real estate down there. But I also was really interested in, talking about who's an expert, right? And when you're an expert, I feel like, oh, I hear expert about me with AI and a little bit, I'm like, and I think that the beautiful thing is that we're all of us learning and becoming experts in different portions and different space. And as you're talking about writing, the first thing you had to do was write compliance policy and, around use and AI. So now you, with your legal background, with your compliance background, you're an expert in AI policy because you've been working on it. And all of us come together. We're all becoming at least smarter in different parts of this. And then we come together. And I think the main thing with anybody who's looking at AI, thinking about AI, the most important thing is to not be afraid of it and to dive in and to learn about it because we can all be smart about AI. We can all be AI experts. It's just a matter of not being frightened of it. I think that's the great thing. And find the people that have been doing work here and there, and they can help you. And my journey to AI and security is a little interesting. A lot of people will notice that I was an English major. And so I get asked a lot, how did I go from being an English major to being a security computer person? And the interesting thing is that it's why didn't I study computers in college is actually the more interesting because when I was a kid, when I was 13, I got onto the DARPANET because my dad was a research professor at MIT Lincoln Labs. And so I got access to the DARPANET through MIT. And the DARPA was that this was at this point that, in the late 70s, it was the precursor to what became the internet, but there were interconnected computers. I was fascinated by how they worked, about what could happen. We had email, we had chat, believe it or not. There was a lot all through dial-up modem. So it was all through an amber or a green screen and all man line interface, but I got completely fascinated and I felt like it was the future. And that's how I got into and I actually found that there was a password flaw at that point way back it was fixed. That was 50 years ago, 40 years ago. In any case, I also got my first taste of AI around that time because there was a professor at MIT, Joseph Wiesenbaum, who developed something called ELIZA, which was the first AI program. And I used it and I was just fascinated by how I could kind of see the tricks. It was really sort of an expert system, but I was fascinated by how it was easy to convince yourself that you were talking to a person and sort of the power of AI. And as I went through my career, I've had a number of different roles. You mentioned some of them. I started out actually inline operationally, which is back where I am now. So I had managed in Cambridge, Massachusetts, an entire network. I led the network. I led the InfoSec role there. And we had 9 offices around the globe. So I've been operational, an analyst. I've been in vendors, as you can see from my background. But I sort of reconnected with AI when I was at IBM. And Watson had beaten Jeopardy, but had not yet been released for cyber. So I was on the team that was part of what we were training Watson for cyber. And I was fascinated because one of my first questions as I found out this was a project that IBM Security was going to work on was I said, how are we going to train Watson? Because I didn't know, how do we train Watson? And someone said, we're going to let Watson look at everything on the internet about security and learn security that way. And I said, does Watson have a really good detector about what is inaccurate? Because there's a lot of inaccurate stuff about security out there. And then I got to learn about how you really trained these systems. This is obviously before Transformers and the Chat GPT generation, but understanding that, it's not that these systems are just magically smart and magically learn, that there's a whole lot of human intervention to make sure that they're going to be purpose fit and perform the actions that we want and help humans and not really replace humans. So I continued my journey at Microsoft. I was very close to the data science work there and, kept up to date on it and spoke often about AI and ML and then did a LinkedIn learning class on risks and failure modes in AI and ML and finally found my way to a company that is trying to make the world a safer AI powered place.
I love the courage to try something new. I think that's what makes life interesting for all of us and gives us a sense of purpose. Keep on keeping on, learning and learning. I want to thank both of you for being here today and participating in this conversation. We are kind of all full steam ahead on adopting AI. And we know, really, as both of you alluded to, that sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and we don't understand all of the implications or the consequences or the impacts, which can sometimes be negative about that. But I just want to kind of focus on now that we kind of have gotten our arms somewhat around how do we govern it when our companies are using it with our customers and stakeholders, how do we as compliance professionals use it? And what is all the kinds of touch points or decision points that we need to think about to do that in a responsible way, right? Just thinking about that, can you tell us, Diana, where do you see companies using it with those customers and stakeholders? And what have you seen in ethics and compliance functions?
Yeah. So an interesting thing, as I was talking about back in the 60s, there was that ELIZA program, machine learning or sort of traditional AI, and sometimes now it's being called predictive AI, but machine learning has been in use in organizations for well over a decade. And in some cases, it's actually been 2 decades, close to 2 decades. And some sectors, a great example is financial services, where being able to look at massive amounts of data and find patterns or connections that hadn't been seen before, very helpful. Try to predict, when do we sell this stock? When do we buy the stock? By ingesting massive amounts of data. These have been in use for a very long time. And compliance has a huge opportunity here to to actually start to govern and look at the use that has been in place for many years at many organizations. So I don't want to lose that in the Gen AI, because Gen AI is so important. And now we're using these bots to talk to customers, to be the first triage. You call your doctor's office. It may not be a person you speak to. You may speak to an AI bot at this point. But also, we've got a lot of this more traditional predictive AI in use. So governance of that, and making sure that compliance has eyes on that, and starting to look at these common touch points, like what data sets were those models trained on? Who trained the models? Are we monitoring the models over time for drift? I.e., is the accuracy or the information we want to come out of this model, is it still on track, or has it started to drift around and the model use? You'll see the weights and biases within them and drift over time, so they're not performing as expected. So compliance has a lot of really great support that we can do there. And then obviously, as we get to Gen AI, understanding who's using these chatbots, how they're using them, what the risks are to the organization, and working closely with security to create a risk profile, and then also get those controls. Then what do we need to do to ensure them? There's also that opportunity that you talked about on the other side, which is what can we benefit from? And there's a lot. These Gen AI tools are fantastic at suggestions. So if you're starting a policy, I don't know if you started, Gwen, by asking ChatGPT what an ethical policy might look like, but they can. I'm not saying have the bot write your policy, but just to suggest things to think about can be very useful. Also, with massive amounts of data looking for anomalies, these systems can be tuned very well, and that can help with compliance and use to understand what's happening in our organization. Is something unusual? Is there an alert? Or are we staying compliant? So those are just a couple of areas where I think it can be obviously a lot more, but I will leave it there.
Hey, Gwen, so what are you thinking about, or maybe adopting a use with your team?
Sure. First of all, I'll say that I think it's kind of unique in this space because we have our current portfolio is over 150 AI projects that we are working simultaneously throughout the organization. And we've divided them into ones that are client facing, ones that are internal usage, and ones that are both. And that we have this phrase that we use a lot about drinking our own champagne, right? Which is, if we're going to develop something for a client, we should use it for ourselves. So there's kind of that combination of things happening. We've got all different kinds of AI projects running, but for the compliance team right now, we have a few things that are in process, and I'll expand it to be compliance and legal, because we work very closely with our legal colleagues as well. We have a chatbot that is currently in beta testing. It is rolled out to about 200 people. That is we call it policy as law AI chatbot, and it is for our internal associates, to be able to ask the chatbot questions about compliance. My team is small. I've got 5 people globally, and we're in 40 different countries. So the ability for someone to get in touch with and ask a live person a question is fairly limited, but they can reach the chatbot 24/7 in all of their languages, which is amazing. We have had people do all kinds of testing, because I will say our first round, we got some weirder answers, that we had a little hallucination issue, but we've built some, guardrails around how the system responds and making sure that it's not hallucinating. We built a larger resource library that is its training material, so we can make sure that it's getting up-to-date documents. And it is really great. We've tried to break it a number of times, and so far it's doing wonderfully. The plan is to roll it out company-wide. So that'll be to 17,000 employees in September. So coming up soon. That is just a force multiplier for my team in terms of being able to help people get just-in-time information about exactly what they need. We have a policy library, most people do, but the amount of time it takes for someone to first find the library and then search for the right term to figure out which policy covers this issue, or which, decision tree might help them make this decision, takes time and effort that most people don't have, or if they start out thinking they have it, by the time it's taken 3 or 4 minutes, they get frustrated and they give up. The chatbot interface really short circuits that for them. You can literally type in, hey, I'm taking a business trip to China. What's my per diem limit for China? And the chatbot will respond. According to policy, blah, 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 page 4, your policy, or your per diem limit is X. And it's just instant response and really increases the usability and reduces the burden of compliance, which I think is the key kind of value add of AI for me, is that it reduces compliance burden for our business people who have, you know, thousands of other work streams they need to worry about, and investing time and effort into compliance takes that away. So we want to make it as easy as possible. Another thing I'll throw out there, we're not doing it yet, but I'm seeing some other companies do it, is use of AI in third-party due diligence. There is a lot of really neat stuff coming out there. It's on my wish list where it'll troll through all of your data, your supplier list or your distributor dealer list or your client list. It can go through your general ledger, look for, round dollar transactions to identify fraud. It can do ultimate beneficial ownership searches and come back with risk profiles of links to businesses that you didn't know your supply chain had links to. So it's exciting, I think, for me, and really will make compliance more effective and more efficient and cost less, which is a great trade-off.
Yeah. I did a chat bot as well. And it really, it changes the focus when you think about compliance as customer service.
Yeah.
And you really change the dynamic where people see that you're a resource for them to help them get the job done versus you're an impediment or a barrier. Lisa, what are you thinking about in your team?
We are thinking and starting to move forward. And I think for me, there are two different areas as I think about this. The first one is outside of our team, the ethical components of this, because Pearson is a learning company and we are working with, as they're building the future of the company and helping build the future of education. Sounds very lofty, but I think a lot of people really do view it as their mission. How do we do this in the right way for students or others to know who they're actually working with? Is this, AI versus a person? What do you want? When do you want it? When is it beneficial? When is it not? So these are big, not so much compliance questions or how do we build it, but how are we, being good stakeholders in this to make sure that these things go in the right direction, which is, to be clear, everybody's intent on that. I mean, that's been a lot of our company's focus right now in trying to make sure we're on the front end of things and doing things correctly that way. And I think that's interesting and a little harder to quantify and talk about. The second thing that you mentioned is for ethics and compliance teams. And we're still working through how do we best use these things. We are thinking about what sort of chatbot and how do we make sure that it is also targeted to the answers and things that we would want people to hear and to know, and also trying to update policies. I think for us, one of the things we think about a lot are gifts and hospitality. And for example, there are some situations where that can be used. On the other hand, there are ways that you can ask a question to get an answer that you may want, which is not necessarily good for reporting or approvals. We're balancing different things, knowing that most of our employees have great intent, but they're also very busy. So they can get the chat bot to say, go ahead, then they're good. And look, I get it. I mean, I do too with technology. That's not a bad thing, but how do we do that right? I want to do what I think my dream is to, I have a very lofty dream on this, but I really think when we are working through our code of conduct, how do we make that a much more interactive type thing where you have questions that it can answer? And then if it's something that we think, to use some sort of logic, that if it's at all ambiguous, this is a great question. Here's where you go to get it answered, whether it's the mailbox or something else, where I also think we can use it best. But I think, it's moving fast. We're trying to really learn it. I think one of the important things to keep in mind is while everybody's so excited about it, make sure you use it or we use it in a way that works with our organization and is something that people get excited about and see the benefit, as opposed to as, as many of us, when we talk to the bot on the phone, when all we want to do is ask a simple question and you start screaming, Aiden, person. We don't want to do that. We're really trying to figure it out from the customer standpoint and the ethical one.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you think about all of the data and the possible uses. The customer service aspect is great when it's a positive experience, not so great when it's a negative. But I'm really fascinated to see how things will develop in regards to auditing and monitoring. I think it's one of the elements of an effective compliance program that most people don't do as robustly as they could, partly because they're reliant on internal audit or others to get the data. And now that barrier is gone, right? And you can develop your own programs to be monitoring continuously, which really moves us from detecting misconduct to preventing it, which is where we all want to be, right? To say, hey, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, we saw that, every time you submit a cab receipt, it's always, $25. How can that be? And, that stuff, people kind of go, oh, okay, I think I'll start doing that. And that's what we want, right? We want to, fix and find and fix as early as possible.
Hey, Ellen, can I add right there too, which is, I want to emphasize too that chatbots can be a great source of data and a great way to do monitoring.
Who's asking?
Right? Who's asking? What business unit?
Why?
Right? What country are they in? How often are people asking about this policy? Does that mean it's not very clear and we need to fix it?
How often?
Yeah. How often are we getting questions about corruption and where are those coming from? And should we be doing more training there? So that's one of the side benefits of having a robust AI program is it gives you more data that allows you to do more monitoring, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
And wouldn't it be cool if, you get these questions and you notice it's from the same area, same country, and you can say, hey, we have a 5-minute module on bribery and corruption. We'd really like you to take this training. And then, it's voluntary instead of mandatory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the possibilities are endless. So it's just amazing to me. I think, the things that you can do, but we also know you got to be careful because hallucinations and other things, just thinking about that. What kind of safeguards or other things would you put in, Lisa?
All right. I'm a little bit new. Whoa. Here. But now it's all gone. Hold on. We're going to have to correct this with Tom.
Yeah, we will.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. We can hear you.
Okay. I've muted my phone or unmute. Does this work? Okay. Perfect. We'll fix that in a minute. Apparently my phone has now decided to work somehow, but apologies.
Okay. That didn't happen. Technology. It's a perfect segue, which is when technology doesn't exactly what you want.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been my day. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that are you hearing a double thing here still?
There's a lag.
Okay.
There's something going on.
Okay. I'm hanging up my phone. And then if not, can you just ask the question again?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely an echo there.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Perfect. I'm unclear whether I'm going to hear you, but I will do my best on that next. So in terms of what we need to do, are you talking about the guardrails and gate posts, correct? For us at Pearson, I think, it's super important for me to learn about those. And I'm not exactly, I would say this is being worked through some of our other teams that are much more experts in how to practically do these things, because we need to figure out how we're best going to be able to avoid, getting things out there the wrong way, as you said. And I'm just going to give a small example of something that really illustrated and hit me on this, which was that I looked myself up once, in a more controlled place, and it immediately came out with like Lisa does it all. Based in Mississippi, she is a well-known textiles person, blah, 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 blah. And she has a podcast about women in compliance. And I thought, wow, so then I re-asked it about Lisa Arfi, and then you knew that. So I'm going back to that in terms of how do we make sure we establish the criteria and the logic to be able to limit answers and get the right answers. I'm very excited to hear about my talents that I wasn't aware of, but with that said, I don't want someone to apply that to the things that they're asking or working through for us. But also with that said, I think we, also are going to be able to do different things in different areas of our business who are experts in the technology, and the other side are helping us really do that, because we do know that part, and that helps us collaborate for what we want. In the future, there are a lot of other things to do, or that we will need to do that. But again, I think that's one of our main things.
And Gwen, as you go down your chatbot path and you think about third-party due diligence and all that, do you have kind of a framework, or are those guardrails that you've already kind of put in place so that as you're making the decisions, it's kind of like our corporate values, right? Every
Yeah.
time you make a business decision, you should say, does it align? Does it make sense? Is it in accordance with the company's mission and purpose and all of that? And does it make sense? So what do you use to kind of, hold you to the ground and make sure that you're not, going astray?
Getting too far over our skis.
Yeah.
We call it a gating process that runs within the company generally around AI projects. And it has, a set of different gates that each project has to go through, including a proof of concept phase. And then there's testing, and then there's, human checkpoints. And this is all built into kind of the process generally. And that has been designed using the NIST framework. So if anyone is starting out in this space, I highly recommend that framework. It is exhaustive. It's not a short read, I'm going to warn you, but it's got a lot of great, really practical points about how to govern an AI project, concerns around risk, the types of risks, how you're going to do a risk assessment around AI, how to do an impact assessment around AI, and the kinds of controls you can put in place around an AI project to make sure that you're taking into account those risks, how to monitor those risks. So I really recommend that framework. I will also mention that ISO now has an AI framework out as well. So that would be another option for people that are looking for somewhere to start. But we have used the NIST framework and are using it currently, and it's working well for us.
Great. Lisa, you have something you'd like to add?
One other thing that I just, as Gwen was speaking, that I think is helpful is I had read, and I give Tom Fox some credit for referencing this, is the Department of Energy's responsible AI use guidelines. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that there really are some parallels to what are in the DOJ and for corporate compliance guidelines. And I think there's a real way we can start applying that. That NIST too is, there's a lot of technical things there, but I think we can also add our skill set, particularly in some of those parallels as they continue to try to develop that part of responsible governance.
Yeah. And Diana, what do you see people using, and what do you use in your organization?
Well, I think that Gwen and Lisa both spoke up about this, is the understanding the risk related to the specific use of what you're doing with that specific AI. Right? Gwen's got 150 projects that are going on. There are probably a wide range of use cases and architectures too. If you think about somebody who wants to go in front of a judge with a wonderful case with previous citations of case law and goes to one of the big giant chatbots like a ChatGPT or a Claude, or asks, maybe Copilot to write it for them, they probably are going to end up with some hallucinations, because it's a little bit of part and parcel about how Gen AI works. Gen AI is supposed to create connections and generate new things. So creating new case law is actually in the realm of these big chatbots. There was an article that was making the rounds in some of the big newspapers the other day about that Gen AI is not good at sort of regular math because, again, it's creating things. But when you think about Gwen's use case for policy, that's very narrow. And that is a good thing when it comes to Gen AI a lot of the time, unless you just want to, you want to brainstorm. Let's talk about, I read about some sci-fi author who was using a chatbot to create a new language. That's a wonderful use for it. But in something like Gwen's case, having a big create everything bot is not actually, you don't want the bot to create new policy. What you want it to do is to be the human sounding interface between hundreds of pages in the policy library and a human being saying, I just want to know what my per diem is, or I just want to know, is this data sensitive or not? Is an address sensitive? Help me. And so in the case of Gwen's example, most likely it's a smaller, narrow LLM that's using it's RAG tuned to the policy library itself. So it's not supposed to generate new policy. And it was probably tuned very carefully when your hallucinations got sort of worked out. It's tuned to say what's in the policy, not to make up new policy. So it's this kind of nice interface. So it's not generating net new content. It's just helping the human being to find the answers that it needs more quickly. The other thing in that kind of use case is that you probably don't have a lot of adversarial. I think Lisa was talking a little bit about like maybe somebody's trying to get the bot to say, yeah, your PDM is $1,000 or something. You probably don't have a lot of your internal users trying to game the system. They just genuinely want to know what the policy is. So in that case, you've got this. I'm sure that as Gwen did all the gating and that with the, and I +1 to the NIST AI RMF too, because I think their map, measure, manage, govern framework is it's really well done, and I think it's a wonderful starting point for a lot of organizations. But again, Gwen's gate are now making sure throughout, is it the right architecture? Have we trained it right? So you put that all together and you can have a great fit. Now, if you are a company that is trying to get a bot to do your customer service and talk to external people, you've got a very different weight on whether or not there could be adversarial attempts to get the bot to hop its guardrails. So you're probably going to have to think about better monitoring for that, more observation to what's coming out, and also a lot more adversarial training. So I think that's the big one with the guardrails, is that there's no perfect. There's a company, Lacara, that had, I don't know if it's still up, but a few months ago, they had to basically try and get to 10 levels of trying to get an LLM to give you a password, even though the LLM has been instructed not to do it. And the first you could pass really easily by just saying, ignore all previous instructions, which is essentially a skeleton key to get AI to ignore its guardrails. But, and as you got up the levels, it got harder and harder to get the AI to give you the information. But still, a very active attacker is probably going to be able to get a lot of AI systems out there to give information that it shouldn't. So it's really important to understand what that use case is and then how you've trained, because we talk about AI kind of like it's like this big smart, it's one big monolithic, it's the AI, but it's really a lot of different agents, different models, different systems, even scripts connecting them. And it's so important that you look at how, just as Lisa and Gwen were talking about, look at how you're using it. And then your guardrails, you can put some into the AI with your instructions, but also the monitoring is going to be really important. Who's using it, how they're using it. And as Gwen said, eloquently, what is that system passing back out? Because that's going to help you understand if it's still purpose built, and also if it might have been drifting into a place you don't want it to go.
And when you think about when you roll it out, I think of AI also a bit like privacy, right? In that, I'm asking you a question, or I'm having some kind of dialogue, or some decision is getting made in a way that impacts me. And I teach, and so does Gwen, students. And one of the things that I know a number of universities have done is said, if you're using AI in any of the work that you are providing the professors, you have to tell us. So where I'm going with this is, are we now going to start to see a requirement that you have to disclose that this is an AI process? Do you have to disclose maybe when there would be human intervention, agent? And am I going to be able to opt out? Do I have to opt in? I mean, what do you guys think about, kind of the ethics of tell me, am I talking to a person or a machine? What are your kind of thoughts about all that, Diana?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you were talking about the students reporting. There have been a number of reports coming out that students that use tools like Grammarly, when it then goes into a tool saying, is this AI or not? It's coming out as AI, even if it very much, and the students can show, this is what I wrote. I went into Grammarly and it's commas and that which that got corrected. It was
I
not.
use Grammarly all the time.
It wasn't substantive, and yet so I think that on both sides, it's going to be people proving it was really me. It wasn't an AI is going to be interesting, as well as
Right.
should we. I do think that we should disclose and be clear with customers if they believe that they're speaking with an AI. If you are down the line doing analytics on your data for business purposes, and you may make a different investment purpose in your GTM strategy or something, I don't think we need to tell everybody about all the AI that is being used within the business, but certainly if you've got a human being interacting, and it can help the company too. There was a case with Air Canada where the chatbot instructed the customer to do something, which is buy a new ticket. And then afterwards, and I don't think the person knew they were talking to a chatbot, but afterwards Air Canada said, but it was a bot, it wasn't a human. And they did have to pay for that customer's ticket. So I think on both sides that legally, and I am not a lawyer, but I do think legally, if you've told the entity interacting with your system that it's an AI, I think that it may help on both sides, either if that customer or user says, hey, that wasn't fair, but also if you have to go to court, you have been very clear that this was an AI, like when Microsoft launched Tay, which is sort of a classic example of poisoned training data. When Tay was launched on what was then Twitter, and people trained Tay to be a terrible racist, and Tay was removed in 24 hours. Microsoft was very clear that it was experimental, that it was a bot, and I think that was absolutely the thing to do.
When what do you think? I mean, these are your employees, right? And have a relationship with the company, and maybe I'm creeped out by it all. I don't, I just want to talk to a person, and I don't want it recorded, and I don't want to feel like I'm being surveilled 24/7 or whatever. I mean, what do you say on your chatbot? Do you say this is AI generated? What do you do?
Yep, we do. We make it very clear. There's actually a little disclaimer that says, this is AI. It is not a person, and it may be prone to hallucination. And if you have questions, or if you're getting answers that don't make sense, please, contact this person. And it's a real person. It's me. And they get to call or email me or, chat.
How many calls do you get?
So far, none, which is great.
9.
But we're very open about that. And we've talked about that too when we roll out to the broader, audience of 17,000 people, that we want to make it clear too that there's limited amounts of confidentiality, because that's, I think, an important consideration, right? Which is there is somebody who is gathering data on the back end. I mean, are we tracking to see whose, machine number matches up? No. But will somebody read their question and probably look at answers and figure out where it's coming from a regional standpoint or a country standpoint? Yes. As part of our announcement, we're being very clear to people, hey, this is how it works. Here's what happens on the back end. And your information is not tracked to you individually, but we are reading and we are looking at answers. So if you have something that is truly confidential that you don't want a Unisys person to read, contact the helpline, because that's run by an outside third party. Here's your option. So we're being very transparent, and that's very intentional. And I think I'll segue with my lawyer hat for a minute too. It's kind of table stakes at this point, given the EU AI Act requires disclosure, requires opt-out. There's now, and it came out last year, and with the current state of Congress in the United States, I don't see it going anywhere this year. But there is a proposal called the AI Transparency Act that would require disclosure of, AI content that's used by any consumer. So we'll see if that actually gets passed in the US, but it would map exactly to what's required in the EU AI Act. I feel like anyone who's doing anything with AI needs to, even if it's for a compliance team or just for a compliance function, needs to keep that transparency in mind. I think it's key to build trust. It's key.
Yeah. I'm going to just mention a little bit back on the point about, in education and how they're doing it. We talked a little bit. I think one thing I've heard, and I think this is fascinating, is some people out there actually using AI or what somebody can read from there and sort of say, we assume you're going to start with that point. And what did you look up and how did that, what did you think about that? And sort of making that into kind of their critical analysis, if it's literature or something else. So it's a way of, instead of arguing about what could or couldn't have been done in a Grammarly versus something else, I think there are some people who are forward thinking, like, how do we use this? Because this is also going to be a tool for people the rest of their lives. And I think that is one other interesting way. It's very different than what we were talking about earlier and what we're thinking about generally, which is how do we make sure we get the right information to our employees so that they can, make more effective decisions and feel the confidence and comfort. But I think it's interesting, the idea of using it as a tool in multiple ways and forward thinking that. And then I want to go back, Gwen, to your point when you were just talking about the EU AI law and GDPR. We both know that all of that, and all four of us, they're out there and they impact things, and the US is always a little bit behind. Going forward, do you think that we're going to end up being more unified, sort of like the EU and the UK that follow along? Or what about, patchwork of states coming up with their own rules and regulations, which is pretty much what we see in most areas once they get started here. But what do you think? Do you think we're going to be able to get ourselves unified on this? Start with you, Gwen.
Oh, starting with me. Yes, I do. I'm optimistic about it. And that's because I think now, yes, the US is behind and we are a patchwork of weird, state level laws that aren't necessarily consistent. I mean, but on a global basis, we're starting to see some moves towards kind of unification. OECD has now come out with guidelines around AI and AI usage. We're seeing some movement at the UN related to AI and AI usage. So I think we will, as usual, kind of follow the EU's example, because they always seem to be first. They were first on human trafficking. They were first on AI. They were first on privacy. But I think that model that they're creating will lead towards kind of more, I don't know, less disparate, let's put it that way, sets of rules and guidelines and best practices. So I'm optimistic that we'll get there pretty quickly.
Diana, what are your thoughts? Do you think the US will get it together?
I certainly hope so. And I do think that I agree with Gwen that there's a lot of motion in this direction. We're seeing other groups, the EU and just Europe in general, because the UK getting involved a little bit, even though they're not officially the EU anymore. But I think that it's really, we we look at what happened with privacy and it was a patchwork, and really we needed an omnibus. And so I'm very hopeful about the Governance and Transparency Act that was introduced. Yes, it would be for the agencies and for government use, but it could be a blueprint for others to use. I just hope that as we bring this legislation forward, that we create a balance, because not enough legislation or not enough oversight or governance, and there is a risk of people using these systems in ways that cause harm in the long run, and sometimes harmful cascading effects aren't seen immediately. So I hope that we've already seen with hallucinations, misinformation, that I trusted the tool. There have been already, great examples of, for example, your credit score being managed by AI, and even what kinds of credit you get offered being managed by AI. And there have been really interesting reports out that women don't get the same credit opportunities that men do sometimes, with these algorithms aren't tuned properly. So we absolutely want to make sure that we don't cause harm. But on the other hand, we have to be very careful how we regulate AI, because we also don't want to stifle innovation and opportunity and adoption. So I very much hope that there is going to be something federally so people don't get caught up in the patchwork. But whatever comes out, I very much hope it's been balanced so that we're not causing the harm, but we're also not stifling innovation.
We have taken up so much of all of your time. And I just want to say thank you so much. And thank you so much to our awesome GWIC community for listening in. We're going to have lots more conversations about this in the future. And hopefully you all will come back and keep us posted. So thank you so much for all of that. And if you're, interested or inspired from listening to this, please join our group, the LinkedIn podcast group, or reach out to any of us directly, because this is, I think, a thing that's going to become larger and larger in all of our lives. And we can really help influence both the policies, the procedures, and how our community deals with it. So thank you all so much for being here. And one last little sort of slightly self-congratulatory, but I'm going to mention post because the Great Women in Compliance podcast, because of all of you, has really grown to the point where we were nominated for a Women in Podcasting Award. It's a People's Choice Award, and it's a voting type thing. So we would think that it'd be great, regardless of if you vote for us or for anyone else in this community. It elevates women and women in our profession, in the podcasting industry, and ethics and compliance. So you'll see more of that on our LinkedIn pages, and voting opens August 1st. So check the group and info on how to vote. We're not going to start giving you weekly, vote for us things, but I just think it's very cool, both for us and for the community. And again, Ellen, Diana, Gwen, thank you so much for being here with us and talking about this really important issue. And thank you to our listeners. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.